We designed this planning tool because in the reality of most of the work we do, there's a space between chaos and order, and there's more written on this in here, where most of the way we plan and organize meetings, we do it as if we're living in an ordered world, like everything's predictable, and long-term strategic processes as well. Here's the goal, this is where we're going, all we got to do is set up a series of objectives, we just fund each of those, we head along that step, love and happiness and peace ensues, right? Has that ever happened to anybody? Have you ever successfully reached your 5-year goal on something? Right? So there's a great saying about, humans make plans and God laughs, right? This is the God piece. Here is the chaos. So for order, for doing ordered projects, project management, the way it's taught traditionally, is actually really good too. So if you, like I say, if you're building a building, many of you will do this as part of your work. You'll be building facilities. You'll be in charge of designing new technology solutions for the people you work with, even if there's attacks or something. But there's a pretty clear sense of there's an end state here, and good traditional project management will help you get there. Most of the work we need to do in the world, confronting questions we don't have answers to, is tricky because chaos is always coming in and eroding, right, the well-ordered, predictable mindset. So this is why this is called the Chaordic Stepping Stones. It helps us to stay in this space of bringing enough order to a project or a meeting or an initiative, but not so much that we choke the life out of it, right? And we allow the chaos to come in and help us discover new things, because that's where innovation comes from. Innovation never comes from doing what you know, right? If you want to innovate and you want to do something new, don't ask the experts in, because they'll just tell you what they know. I mean, you'll learn something new, but you're not doing anything new. Innovation always comes from the margins. It comes from the people you've never heard from before. It comes from the situations you've never engaged in. That's where you learn the fastest, and that's where we evolve the fastest. Okay? Cool? So that's the basis of the word chaotic. And so the question becomes, and the question became for all of us, if we want to work in this situation, how do we avoid getting trapped by the seduction of order, right? Because it's so seductive to want to have your nice, neat, and tidy plan. And if you're a consultant, you can make a killing selling Excel spreadsheets to people to solve unsolvable problems. I'm just saying, if you want to do that, go for it. I consider that fundamentally unethical work, but you'll make a killing, okay? So just to know. So this is the thing I sell instead to people, and it basically requires you to be working together at every stage. So a fundamental piece about this is that it's participatory. Every stage, if you find yourself doing anything alone here in this process, you're probably doing it wrong. So that should be a check. The purpose of this also is that it should focus on learning. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little acronym. In fact, this is brand new. Nobody's ever seen this before in this teaching. Here's the acronym. Plume. Plume. These principles should help you as a little checklist as you go through designing and executing your strategies. Is it participatory? That's the P. Right? If I'm the only one doing something, I'm doing it wrong. Is it learning? Are you learning something? This is a process. This is a design tool that helps groups learn together. If you're just delivering content and nobody's learning anything, you're doing it wrong. It's got to be about learning. Okay? It's got to be about shared learning. Is it useful? Meetings get a big knock because everyone says we just sit around talking all the time and we never get anywhere, right? And that is sometimes actually quite useful to do that. Just sit around and talk all the time and not get anywhere. That's called having an evening at home with your brothers and sisters. There's no strategic objective to hanging out after dinner. We just crack a few beers and put our feet up and just watch the world go by. And that's totally fine. But when we're doing strategic work, making sure you know that it's useful, it's got to have a use. It's got to have some kind of usefulness. Otherwise, it is just sitting around talking for no reason at all. Multimodal is the fourth one. Are we engaging people in different ways? People have different abilities. People have different gifts. We need different modes in order to bring them out. If we're just talking all the time and we're not getting out into the world and learning, or we're just drawing all the time and we're not making sense of what we're seeing, then we're not using all of the modes available to us. Got it? And the last one is it emergent? As I'm going through all of these things, do I know what the answer is? If I know what the answer is, I better just go ahead and do it, right? And not pretend. There's a kind of engagement that happens in the world. You see it a lot with government people, because engagement has become very professionalized, where there's already decisions that have been made, and then they go out and they engage, right? But it's not emergent. The answers are already there. And if you want to make a killing as a consultant, become a professionalized engagement specialist that works with state and federal governments to create engagement processes right around outcomes that are already decided. You'll make a killing. I consider it fundamentally unethical, but you will make your millions doing that. Okay? And then evaluate your efforts, because you'll always get a high mark. The reality of the world is that we're trying to confront emergent and difficult problems, right? We can't be imposing solutions. So if you're dealing with emergence, in other words, we're trying to create solutions that people leave the room with, that nobody brought into the room with them. You can do that in a meeting, you're rocking and rolling. And you do that all the time with the people you work for. All the time. If you're really working for them, you're creating solutions together with them that neither of you could have thought of on your own. That's power on, right? And that's also the beauty of being in relationship. That's why we get into relationship with each other. That's why I can tell you what to do, but so that together we can create something. Are you good? That's the framing. In this process, I work with all of my clients this way. It's just, we just start here. The very first thing I ask when people phone me up, because I'm a consultant, and I don't make noises, but I'm fundamentally ethical. When people call me up, I really pay attention to the very first thing that comes out of their mouth. Because the very first thing that comes out of their mouth is the need for what we're doing. Right? They're like, hey, are you Chris Corrigan? Yes. Cool, I've been looking for you. Why? Well, we need to do this. Okay, and I'm like, I type actually as fast as I can to capture all of their words, because later on, when we start trying to figure out what it is we're going to do, we start intellectualizing, we lose that kind of heartfelt need. Need simply means, what is the current state of the world that has made you so crazy that you've called me to help you? What has driven you to that? All right? What requires us to have a meeting? What requires us to create this strategic project? There's something in the world that can be felt, it can be discerned, and it can be talked about in a way that's a powerful need. Understanding this is really important, because all participatory process, to make it effective, hinges on a great invitation. And a great invitation is an invitation that responds to the need that we all know, even if it's not something we've ever spoken before. Somebody says, I'm doing a meeting on Monday, or on Sunday, when I get home, with a group of people who work in animal welfare. Right? All different kinds of organizations working in animal welfare, and they've traditionally been fighting with each other. And somebody just called it. It's like, we could do so much more together if we just agreed on a set of principles and some shared work that gets us away from all the ways we fight with each other. We could do more together. And she said it. And immediately 34 people from different organizations said, you're right. The registration to come to this event was so yes, thank you for finally saying it. We need to get together because we can do more together. And it's time we got together to do that. Naming that need is the most powerful way to begin the process of organizing. For a strategic initiative, for a community meeting, for making change. Name the need. It's the current state. Clear with that? This is not a needs assessment. This is not the kinds of gaps in services. That's not what we're talking about with needs. We all need food, we all need love, we all need shelter, we all need food. It's not that kind of need. It's the thing that's kind of when I'm working in faith communities, it's really helpful, because this is the thing that prophets say all the time. So to become a good inviter, you need to be kind of a prophet of your time. So this is what's happening. People will think you're crazy, but the ones who get it will come with you. Those are the people you need. Okay? And people aren't excited about direction. Once you've got the need, you can decide what your shared purpose is together. So how are we going to address this need? What is it possible for us to do together? So the shared purpose and the need, the purpose gives you a sense of like, where do we want to go? Here's where we are. Where do we want to go? There's a woman, Mary Parker Fuller, has a great line. It says, purpose is the invisible leader. Which I really love. And when I was saying yesterday about like how in complexity you can be guided by your ethics, right? You can be guided by a shared ethic. That sense of like, what is the purpose? What is my purpose? What is our purpose together? Is a really compelling way to begin to invite people to come together to meet the need. Good? So the purpose is critical in that sense. When you know what the need is, and you know what the purpose is, you can begin inviting people together. Who can help with this? Who do we need to go get with? Right? Who do we need to involve? Now, you can start by making a list of people that you need to involve, but a great invitation into a participatory process has to be personal. I would say that it's like you could send out an email and hope that people show up, but if you really want people to commit, you got to go to them and you got to say, I love you, Lisa. I know exactly why you need to be a part of this. It's going to be way better for you to come here because of this. This is what you offer. And then to engage somebody in a conversation and go, and so what else do you think we could bring, you know? It's like, I see this in you, here's our need and purpose, what do you think we could bring? That kind of invitation, taking the time to invite people into meetings like that, means you don't have people that just sort of show up to see what's going on. You have people that are committed to be there. And that's true of a meeting, it's true of a long-term strategic change process. Take the time to invite people based on the need and the purpose. And when you do come together, and even as you're beginning to work together, you can start to name some of the principles of cooperation. How is it we're going to be together in this process? Every voice matters. Like one that you use in Neighbors is like, seek the gifts, right? Seek the gifts or something. So there's lots of different principles you can choose. My advice is always just choose a couple. Make them principles that are real, not like, oh, everybody's valued. It's like, everybody's valued. But it's like, a thing like, a principle like, every voice will matter in this process, means you can hold yourself to account. Everybody is valuable. You can't really hold yourself to account. You can always say you're doing it, even if you're not. But if every voice matters, you can definitely see in a group of people whether that's happening or not. So a principle, committing to a principle like that, and we were talking about the Marines principles, like when the battle plan breaks down, it's like stay connected, take the high ground. Good principles. You know you're doing them or not. But those principles will help you. And they're critical because as you go through this, the chaos is going to begin changing what you're doing, and the only thing you can hold on to is the principles at the end of the day. So having good principles that you can look at that will help guide you and keep you together, keep you in relationship is really important. Okay? Any questions on this stuff yet? Does this make sense? Thumb up, sideways? Getting it? Okay, just a little temperature. There's a lot. But basically, when you've completed these things, you have everything you need to know to create an invitation. And if I were to break out my invoices to my clients the way I don't break them out, but if I were just to look at my time, if I'm like planning a big one-day meeting, an important strategic meeting, I'm billing you 80% of my work is up front. 80% of my work is this. It's not sitting in the meeting and facilitating. If you have a shitty invitation, you're going to have a crappy meeting. If you have a crappy invitation, you are not going to be able to engage people and do work together. The better your invitation, the more hungry people will be to be together, and the more work you can do, and the more productive you can be with the people you're doing. So focus on this a lot more than you think you need to. One of the sayings that I have is invitation is a verb. So we use the word in here as inviting. You have to not only do inviting, you have to be invited all the time. You have to constantly be inviting people into your process. You have to embody invitation. If you don't, if you're like, hey, come to my meeting, you know, it's like, I'm not so sure. But it's like, wow, I'm so glad to see you. Who got this meeting up here? And we need people who work in Nordstrom to provide us with like all kinds of interesting retail experience. And you're like, I'm your person. I did that. Right? So it's like, And I'm not. It sort of sounds silly, but if you don't truly believe in what you're doing, people are not going to show up. Invitation is a verb. If you're just sending out emails and making posters, you're doing part of it, but you're doing most of it wrong. All right. Next phase. So the next phase, before you actually design your meeting, the next phase is actually the implementing phase, and there are basically two pieces to pay attention to here. The first one is outputs. So, you can hear me, I'm talking at different scales. An individual meeting, a staff meeting. How many of you do staff meetings? You all do staff meetings? Okay. Do you know what your output is every week from your staff meeting? What is your intended output from your staff meeting? Nobody knows. So, what's the output of your staff meeting every week? Right. So, what you produce as a result of that staff meeting? Or an hour together. Right. So even going into a staff meeting with that level of intention about like, what does this container produce? Every time humans get together, I mean more code words, but two or more gathered, there's like a production that happens. What is that? When you're calling people together as a leader, as a host, as a support person, when you're in relationship with somebody, you're creating this incredible container between you. Just be aware that, and we don't walk around all day thinking about this, but be aware when you're being intentional that container, the job of a container like that, is to produce it. The job of a seed is to produce a tree. And a container that is productive like that, there's a great saying about like, you can count the number of apples on a tree, but you can't count the number of trees. No, you can't count the number of... You can count the number of apples on a tree. You can't count the number of trees in a seed. Trees. It says one seed will grow into a tree and produce how many apples? And how many trees are produced by all the apples on that tree? Like a seed contains an awful lot of trees. One apple tree, you can count all those apples and be done with it. When we're working together to create these kinds of containers, we can produce like seeds. And people say, oh, we're producing seeds for the future. Dude, if you're producing seeds, that's amazing. Because seeds contain multiple possibilities. And every time two humans come together, we have that ability to create multiple possibilities. So when you're doing strategic work, all I'm saying is, when you're just sitting with people on the bus, be aware of that. Your life will change if you engage with somebody, they may just like, get out of my face. But you may meet an incredible conversation, but when you're doing strategic work, be conscious of the outputs that are coming out. What are you trying to do? Okay? Right. So an example of outputs, for example, would be this meeting will produce a report. Or Jerome's thing about this meeting will produce a list of things that we agreed we're going to do together. That's an output, very simple. But if you name it, it's amazing how focused you get together. Because you know what it is that you're going to do. And you can still allow for emergence to happen because you don't know what's going to be on that list. You don't know what's going to be in that report. That content is emergent. But what you're doing is deciding, like, what am I going to do to hold that content when we produce it? So it could be a list. But a list is no good if you can't implement it, right? So the other thing you need to think about before you decide on how you're going to have your meeting or your strategic process is what I call the architecture of implementation. How are you going to support getting the stuff on the list done, getting the stuff in the report done? So that includes, usually for me, three things. It includes money or financial resources. It includes time, and it includes people. Right? Those are your three basic resources you have available to you. So if you get a sense of like, how much money have we got to work with? How much time do people have? Everybody's busy. Great strategic change efforts are limited because we don't have time at the end of the day to actually create the revolution. So, we just schedule our busyness and then we never get transformation done. And who are the people, right? Who are the people? Could be your coworkers, but it's also people in power. So who are the people in your system that can say yes or no, make things happen? Get them on side. So if you're making a massive change initiative, we were doing a big thing on forestry. And at the end of the day, we were going to produce a report, but the danger was that report would just end up on a shelf, right? So before this big conference on forestry to produce these reports, we contacted people like in the federal government, the standing committee on forestry, right? So the standing committee knew the report was coming. Well, they have the power to create policy and regulations. They had the power to implement what it was we were going to be doing. But if we just produce a report and put it on the shelf and expect them to find it, that's going to be really hard. But if we call them up and say, can you put us on the agenda for 4 weeks after our conference? We're going to have material to bring to you with specific policy recommendations. And they said, yeah, sure, that sounds great. We'll see what we can do to bring resources, time, and people to implementing and supporting those things. So it could mean setting up relationships with power. It definitely needs to be find out who has a no. Find out who has the power to say no to what you want to do. And get into relationship with them somehow. Find people who know them. Find people who know them. You know, just show up at their office door and go, hey, we hear you're cool, and we need you on site. Right? And these people are often hidden in government bureaucracies, but they're there. Because if they have the power to say no, they also have the power to say yes. And the way to transform that is with relationship. If you show up in their office and you try and sell them on stuff, no good. Because people do that all the time. If it's genuine, authentic relationship, you have a better chance. If you can't get into a relationship with the people who say no, know where they are. Just know where they are, know what is acceptable to them and not acceptable to them, right? And then just deal. It might mean more work for you at the end of the day, that's cool, but you are intelligent.
It also helps to get into a relationship with the person. Person
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it helps you to learn.
In the nicest of ways.
Right, and it helps, yeah. In a New Jersey kind of way. Something about like, there's 1 million baseball bats sold in New Jersey and only 50,000 balls every year. So the point here being, line up your best possible chance of making it work before you go in. Now that doesn't mean as you begin doing your work, things are going to change, and that's all cool. But this is part of the planning. This is not something you do. You had a meeting and then you go and figure out, okay, what are we going to do with all this stuff? You should know going into your meeting or your strategic change process what we're going to do with this. You should know going into a care relationship and a support relationship with someone what you're going to do with what you learn, right? This is what you're facing. I got that. Well, here are the resources you need. Right? We were doing that yesterday with somebody. What's the architecture of implementation that could make it happen? Good? Put the cart before the horse. Right? Because we always just go on, we always forget about this. And then we always moan about, oh, we want action. Well, like, plan the action beforehand, then go into your meetings. So now you've kind of figured out how you're going to implement your invitation. Now you got to figure out how to do it. But this has given you lots of great information for organizing your meeting. So the first thing we do, before like putting together an agenda or a longer term strategic plan about how we're going to do our work, the first thing we do is we just get the basic concept. So there's lots of different choices you have about how to gather people together. Is it going to be a circle like this? Are we going to deliver content? Is it going to be all dialogue? Is it an innovation lab? Are we going to do learning journeys? The wisdom of why I learned about doing this concept work before designing an agenda was this. Tuesday and I did some work about 10 years ago with the Kellogg Foundation. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to change the way they have a massive food conference about the state of good food in the United States. We brought 650 people together from all across the United States, all of them involved in organic and farmers markets and food deserts and equity and labor rights and all kinds of stuff. Talk about transforming the food system. And for 10 years, people have been telling them that they wanted the conference to be participatory, to look like what we've been doing for 3 days. And instead, they knew this, but instead they just would have PowerPoint presentation after PowerPoint presentation. People would go into breakout sessions and the PowerPoint presentation and the PowerPoint presentation. And people would leave after being together for a week, not knowing anybody in the food movement. And you've wasted all of this human talent and creativity and brilliance. So we worked with them to create concepts for a participatory conference based on what their evaluations had said, based on what their people had said. And we brought to this, and we sat together with Play-Doh and pipe cleaners, bits of cardboard, magazines. We made concepts of what a conference would look like. And then in the boardroom of the Kellogg Foundation in Battle Creek, Michigan, this $6 billion foundation, we presented to the people who had the power to say yes or no our paper cutout kindergarten version of what this conference would look like. And they got triggered. This is crazy. This is never going to work. This is like so irresponsible. How are we going to ensure that it's going to be a good conference? All this good stuff. And we were like, yes. Name limiting beliefs. Well, we were trying to trigger, and we asked the question. At one point we asked the question when we had these models laying out there and they were looking at them going, oh God. And then one of our team members said, what makes you tremble? Oh, I'll tell you what makes me tremble. We brought out the limiting beliefs. So their fears, like we're not going to be in control. Like, how is this going to... So we could have the conversation about the fears they have, about the process. Now all of you, when you're doing work that's emerging, you're always going to be confronted by fear. You don't know what's going to happen. It might go sideways. We will build into the structure things in our agenda that will mitigate our fear. So it's funny, the first year we did this, it was very participatory, and the suits got really nice. So the second year we did it, we were still working and trying to destroy their conference because they wanted it destroyed. They were like, they imposed a whole afternoon of PowerPoint presentations because they were just too freaked out by the fact that they couldn't do their thing. And it got 23% approval rating in the evaluations. Everything else we were doing was in the 70-80%. That's when the writing was on the wall, and they realized they got so much ego invested in this that we were right all along, right, to co-create it and to develop it. We were delivering the conference that people wanted, thank you, but they weren't getting it. So after you've got the limiting beliefs out there and you can have that conversation about it's hard, but let's stay in it anyway, right? Then you can build the structure. Like it's the last thing you do. And this is so weird because oftentimes when people call me up as a facilitator, they're like, oh, can you come and do our one-day meeting? Here's the agenda. We need to, and I'm like, whoa, like kiss me first, people. I like to go out for dinner before we do this. Like, how do you know this agenda is a good agenda? Well, because, we sat and we planned it out. And, it's like, well, is it meeting a need? No. What are the outputs? Oh, we haven't thought about that. But this is what we do. We just go immediately to creating the agenda and then we figure everything else out. I'm saying do that last. Do that last. Because then what you're going to have is you're going to have people checked into what's really going on, why you're really together. You've got the right people in the room. You've agreed on a set of principles. So when everything goes haywire, you can bring it back to that. You know what it is you're producing together. You know how you're going to give it the best chance of living out of the meeting at the end of the day. You know what the concept is. You've dealt with the fears. Now we can plan our 3-hour meeting. But it's going to be the best damn 3-hour meeting you've ever done. Because you put in all this prep work. Good? Questions?